say we probably should get started.
Excellent. Okay, well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the 2022 Secular Summit. Really glad to have everyone here today. I've enjoyed several of these as a board member and now as your humble chair. I really appreciate the attendance of everyone here. We've got over 90 attendees today, and I'm always glad to spread the good word, as it were. We've got an excellent program today with some really wonderful speakers. But before we do that, I'd really like to go ahead and give a big thank you to our sponsors. So today's summit was made possible by Katie Conway, Peter Cullen, David Fearing, Mary Ganapole, Ed and Libby Goff, Ian Hamp, Greg Jackson, Whit and Janet Johnson, Philip and Sharon Lentz, Karen McClelland, Deborah Neal, Bruce and Kathleen Pettigrew, and Jacob Seltzer. So thank you guys so much for your sponsorship. We really enjoy being able to come together this way and celebrate the progress that we've made as individuals and as this organization, and our ability to brag about ourselves and our amazing membership. So thank you very, very much for making that possible for us. Before we get to the introduction of our new board members, it's just absolutely necessary that we take the opportunity to remember Diane and Steve Ewell. They were longtime members and benefactors of Secular Arizona, and they focused on supporting and expanding our legal program. And that was with respect to our particular organization, but their support for other secular organizations and for the public school system has been going on for just a tremendous amount of time. And they really did some yeoman's work in advancing the secular effort in the state of Arizona, and helping a lot of our local organizations set national standards, to be quite frank. To cover a little bit about Diane, she grew up as a Lutheran, but reading Bertrand Russell's "Why I Am Not a Christian" started her on her path to free thought in her sophomore year of college. I know that she's not the only person that Bertrand Russell has impacted that way. I enjoyed his work quite a bit as well, Flying Teapots and all. Throughout her life, Diane always retained one thing from her religious upbringing that made sense to her: the golden rule. Diane taught as a public school teacher for more than 30 years and cared deeply about education. She was married to her best friend, Steve, himself a former ordained priest and psychologist, for 5 decades until he passed away in 2021. Together, they were active in the secular movement, as I mentioned previously, and they generously supported the Freedom from Religion Foundation, Free Thought Arizona, and of course, Secular Arizona. And they had multiple public school projects across Tucson and Southern Arizona that they funded. Just a tremendous amount of support that they gave down there for decades. And as we all know, public education is a cornerstone for secularism and a well-educated people with equal access to the opportunity for a quality education is essential for any people. And Diane and Steve both recognized that and knew that very well. Diane passed away in April of this year, and in line with their personal beliefs, both Diane and Steve chose to bring about their deaths in the most pain-free and peaceful way possible. The Death with Dignity has been one of our affiliate groups and a program that we have supported throughout the entirety of the existence of this organization, and it's nice to know that they were able to put their own achievements and to work in their passing. So again, I would just like to remember and demonstrate the appreciation of myself and the board, and on behalf of all of our members, I'd like to lift up Diane and Steve and recognize them for all of the work that they put in. And they have done a lot to continue their legacy with some really major support that they've given to our organization and several others as part of their legacy planning after the fact. So thank you, Diane and Steve, for your work, and we hope to continue doing the good work in your name as we continue to go forward as an organization. Speaking of doing that good work, I would like to recognize the newest members of our board. We're lucky enough to have 3 absolutely stellar folks join us here. The first of which, and you should recognize these people because they've certainly been around for our events. The first of which is Kevin Hondo Hickman. I actually went to school with a relative of Kevin's a long time ago. Hickman's introduction to the importance of secular government started over 15 years ago when he joined the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office and saw the one-sided nature of programs offered to incarcerated individuals. All were faith-based, specifically Christian. As a lifelong atheist, Hondo knew there were others of all religions who wouldn't have access to programs that fit their needs. So he championed access to more diverse programs, especially those without faith-based association. There's still an ongoing effort to improve that for the chaplaincy in particular. He took his secular values into his work with incarcerated populations, helping them to access college courses. Hondo has been an active member of the secular community as an assistant state director for American Atheists and is a founding member and current national director of the Reason Riders Atheist Motorcycle Association. We also have Karen McClelland. Karen McClelland, Sedona resident since 1987, has served on multiple PTA and school boards and has been active with SOS-AZ. Karen is active in advocacy at the state legislature and serves on the board of directors for the ASBA as a Yavapai County director. My mother was a member of the board of directors of the ASBA 25 years ago. She was a member of the Planned Parenthood Advocates of Arizona Board of Directors and is a member of the Leadership Council of Arizona List. She was on the board of the Democrats for the Red Rocks, is currently an elected PC and a member of the ADP State Committee and the Copper State Leadership Council, and is a member of the Americans United, Freedom from Religion Foundation, American Atheists, American Humanist Association, and Sedona Rationalists Group. How in the world you found time to join our board? I don't know, but I really appreciate you finding room for us in your busy commitments. And of course, we have Vanessa Torre. Vanessa has been politically active for many years as a community manager and trustee with Community Associations Institute. She has worked to track legislation to keep harmful bills from passing, often lobbying or working with legislators to rewrite such bills, including working with John McCain's office. This work resulted in McCain pulling an amendment at the last minute, which some called, quote, nothing short of a miracle, end quote. Vanessa is a firm believer in separation of church and state and felt compelled to get involved with secular AZ, as she's not one to sit and watch our state work against its residents' best interests. With recent Supreme Court moves to give more power to the states, the work of this organization is especially critical. Thank the 3 of you so much for joining our board and helping us continue our efforts. They're all wonderful, qualified people who I'm sure will really help drive our efforts moving forward, and folks that have already supported our organization through your previous roles and efforts. So I'm glad that we have the opportunity to recognize you and your new commitment to our board. December 10th, that is today. December 10th is Human Rights Day, so excellent convergence. Our ideals meeting this day and our ability to recognize and celebrate that. On this day in 1948, the United Nations General Assembly adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Every year on December 10th, we recognize that all people have inalienable rights, regardless of race, color, religion, sex, language, political opinion, birth, or other status. And as secularists, I believe we hold up all of these rights as essential to humanity. Okay. Now we get to move on to the rest of the program. You don't have to listen to me speak anymore. And surprisingly, a miracle itself, I am right on time. So let me now introduce Dr. Carmen Celestini. She's our guest speaker. She is a full-time lecturer at the University of Waterloo in the Department of Religious Studies and the Arts First program, and a Post Doctoral Fellow with the School of Religion at Queen's University. Her research focuses on religion and social theory and the overlapping belief systems of apocalyptic Christian thought and conspiracy theories, and the impact of these beliefs on the American political system. Dr. Celestini, thank you very much for being here, and we look forward to your presentation.
Hi, thank you. I'm just going to preface this that I think that I've gotten COVID, and so I'm not at my best. So please forgive me if I'm not as wonderful as I would like to be. But I'm going to share my screen and show some PowerPoints. And from there, so can you all see my screen?
Yes, we can.
We can.
Yes, perfect. Thank you. I'm just going to start the slideshow. So I'm going to start this talk discussing what conspiracy theories are and talking about how they intermesh with religion. And then I'm going to give some examples from across America and some things that are happening at this point. So I know when everyone thinks about conspiracy theories, they sort of have this idea about lizard people and individuals who are wearing tinfoil hats, and we all have some type of vision of who those individuals are. But the one thing that I really want to stress throughout this talk and about conspiracy theories is that it is an articulation of injustice. Now, that injustice may be real or it may be perceived, but underneath all of it is this attempt to understand the world around them and articulate an issue. So when I talk about conspiracy theories, the two main definitions that I use are from two scholars named Mark Fenster and Michael Barkin. And both of them talk about how conspiracy theories actually rise when there is issues in society as a whole, and they can take hold. When there's ideas of the occult, if there is chaos happening, and if there is some type of radical politics, and very much so when there's heterodox religion. Now, if we think about America at the crossroads that it's at right now, we can see all of those things conspiring together and meshing and creating these conspiracy theories and these belief systems. Now, what happens with that is that the people who are articulating or believing the conspiracy theories feel that the government in power and the institutions like media, universities, all of these things have been infiltrated. And what they're doing is they are distrustworthy and they do not articulate the worldview of these individuals. And so they feel that they're disenfranchised from the government because A, it's distrustful, and B, it doesn't articulate their worldview. There is this theory that the things that are happening in the world are not governed by randomness, that everything that happens is happening because it's been conspired to happen that way. Now, individuals who believe in conspiracy theories become what we call social heroes. Now, this happens because messages are repeated over and over and over again. So if we think about the media, if we think about in 2001, the best articulation of this example is to think when we talked about the word terrorist, there was always a hyphen that was in there, especially after 9/11. It would always be Islamic terrorists or Muslim terrorists. And as time progressed and they continued to use those words, there was no longer a need to have the hyphen in front of it. It was what we understood that word to be. Now, that is us profiling and us doing that, but that fear factor no longer needs that because the media has propagated that idea. Now, these fears affect us and how we perceive and how we speak in everyday situations. How we understand the world, is that fear becomes absolutely central. Now, for conspiracy theories to take hold, there has to be perpetual disaster, one bad thing happening after another. Now, if you see the world that way and you're religious, you may turn to whoever your God or deity is and pray to them and ask for some type of help or intercession to make this chaos or this perpetual disaster end. When your prayers or your deity does not engage and does not end that chaos, then what happens is you look for a human-made reason why that is happening. And that helps you sort of understand how things are out of control, but now you are in control of that situation because you know the truth, you know what's happening. Now, people who see themselves as a conspiracy theorist who holds the ultimate truth, they see themselves as being social heroes. They're going to save the world. That paranoia isn't just about themselves. That paranoia is about the world and how they conceive it. Now, when we denigrate them or we say, oh, they're just conspiracy theorists, or in America, if we call them a basket full of deplorables, that validates their position. It tells them that they are on the right path because by being the hero that's going to save the world, they're going to be ostracized. Their friends aren't going to engage with them. Society is not going to engage with them because society is a part of the problem. And so this validation that we give them by name calling, by attacking, it tells them that they are fighting for God, country, and family. Now, this can put them in a position where they are both the victim and the hero. They perceive themselves as being, in a sense, victimhood, that the cabal or whatever conspiracy theory they believe in is attacking them, attacking their understanding of the world, and attacking society. And they are put in this position where they have to battle constantly. And yet the people that they're trying to save are the very ones who are attacking them. So they take this victim identity and it puts them into a membership community. Now, if we think about this online, they are creating connections that are borderless, and they all have very similar belief systems, very similar ideas about what's happening in the world. And these things start pushing these things together. And so politicians can take advantage of this. So if we think about right now, it can create like a moral panic. So if we think of one of the things I'm working on right now, which is the groomer moral panic, politicians will come in and say, you know what? I am going to solve this problem, even though it is not a problem, but it's a sense that it is a problem. And so politicians will come in to save us and to stop this attack. Now, we can see that happening with various laws, like in Texas and in Florida. And so we can see how politicians can become the voice of the people who are affected by this moral panic or affected by conspiracy theories. Now, a lot of conspiracy theories are interlinked with apocalypticism and this thought that it is the end times. So they link it to the book of Revelation and they look for this catastrophic event to come. Now, we've seen historically that there are social movements that become attached to these things. Now, these social movements can either go into private enclaves and separate from society, or they can become social heroes as well and start engaging and trying to bring forth this end time and protect those that they love and be there for the 1,000 years of peace at the end. So when they look at what's happening in the world, so events that they perceive as being disasters, one right after the other, it is a revelation of secrets to them. They understand the world. They're looking for this moral order. And when these things happen, it starts explaining that movement is happening towards the end. It provides them with a master narrative on how to understand the world. So when we think about, when we think about QAnon, we see this ultimate evil and we see this ultimate good, and they perceive themselves as being on the side of the eternal. And they know because they have this truth that they will be the heroes who are at the end, who will solve and be there for that 1,000 years of peace once God has returned. Now, conspiracy theories intermingle with this, right? So if you've turned to your God and that God isn't answering, and then you look and you can find this cabal that is there, you can solve the morality of the world by taking over the government or by defeating the evil that is within the government. Now, this is the ultimate fate of humanity, and that's how they perceive what they're fighting against in these conspiracy theories. So they're attracted to it because it provides blame why things aren't happening, right? So if we think about American politics right now, we could see that the blame is that the Democrats are obviously, human traffickers, or they're running a film and none of this is a reality. But when things don't happen the way they perceive it to happen, like the end times happening, or Donald Trump and JFK coming together and being a team as president and vice president again, they have a reason why it didn't happen. It provides the blame, the scapegoat, the person or the group that they can blame to do this. They absolutely believe that there is subversion that is happening within the government, within media, and within universities and all institutions of society. And they're all working against them in this group. Now, what we're having in the world right now, not just in America, but we're having something that's called a super conspiracy theory. So what that is if you think about like back in the 60s or the 70s, if someone didn't believe in the moon landing, those conspiracy theorists would not have connected with people who believed in the Illuminati controlling the world. But now we're seeing, people who are anti-vaxxers, who were anti-vaxxers prior to COVID, and people who believe in the Illuminati, and people who believe in QAnon, all coming together. And those conspiracy theories are coming together in a hierarchical position. And they're linking together to create one super conspiracy theory that has a whole bunch of different branches all over it. Now, when we bring religion into this, religion is such a powerful motivator for social movements. It provides a cognitive, affective, and moral dimensions of their world. And their belief systems are tied to traditions. So we can see this idea where there's ideas of traditional gender roles, traditional family roles, traditional morality, how they understand and value morals in society. There's usually a moment in each group where they think this is the time period where morality started collapsing in our nation. And so they have a reason why it is happening, and it defines for them what injustice is. And so together, it provides an identity for them where they have their religious beliefs, plus they have their conspiratorial beliefs, and they link together, overlapping. Now, religious language itself is something that provides motivation for these social movements. Now, if someone asked me what the word liberty meant, I would have that idea in my mind, that definition. Now, if I asked someone who is amongst our audience, or all of the audience, what that word means, we would all have very different definitions of what that word means, but we know it's something worth fighting for, and it's something that's really important. So the value of it is something that can mobilize us, even if we define it differently. Now, they can use religion to connect between God and political will. So if we're understanding America as a Christian nation, then God is part of the nation itself. God's rules should be what is governing the land. Now, this idea of this distrust of institutions turns ideas in group. They'll turn to the groups that are disliked by the group. So if I was Prime Minister Justin Trudeau in Canada, and I say that the convoy people are distrustful, that they're racist, that they're all of these things, then conspiracy theorists will turn to them, because obviously if a distrustful government, and a government that has been subverted, believes that these people are bad, they must be good, so they must know the truth. And so what we see is this linking of things together, where we would normally not have conspiracy theorists linking with extremists. We absolutely have that happening now. Now, this nested conspiracy theory includes QAnon, which I'm sure I don't have to define, the Great Reset, which is linked to the World Economic Forum, and Klaus Schwab. And there is this belief that Klaus Schwab and many government actors that are attached to the World Economic Forum are going to create this movement where we own nothing, and that we will lose all of our power and become enslaved to this world government. Now, that comes from a video that was released by the World Economic Forum in 2016. And that video was one of the videos where they asked people to project what is going to happen in 2030. It is a 6-minute video. It was on their Twitter account for maybe 2 weeks and then was taken down and forgotten about. But when Prince Charles, now King Charles, and Justin Trudeau and Biden all used words that were very similar to the Great Reset, people started looking into it. And then they linked it to this World Economic Forum. There's also a very religious conspiracy theory that started here in Canada called the Blue Beam Project. And in that, they believe that there is going to be a hologram of all of the gods in the world that will tell us that we were wrong and that the ultimate God is whoever is going to take the throne as the world government. So in this case, most likely Klaus Schwab. This is also linked to ideas of the Great Replacement, which is this theory that white people will be replaced by immigrants and people of varying ethnicities and races. Now, you're thinking, okay, this is a whole lot of things, but I'm going to give some examples of what's actually happening in America right now. There is this movement called Patriot Churches, and it is actual seedling churches that exist in brick and mortar. But they have also created the Patriot Church Network, which is a social movement. There are currently 5 locations in America: Knoxville, Lynchburg, Spokane, Moses Lake, Houston, Texas. Now, they're all non-denominational. And it was founded in 2020 by a pastor named Ken Peters. And his work spurred on this Patriot Network. Now, what they believe is that they are spiritually active, they're governmentally engaged, but they're a grassroots movement that are going to take back America from the tyranny that is happening. And the way they are going to do that is by bringing their religion and their movement to the government, to school boards, to municipal governments, to all levels. And their idea is to take over America through this engaged congregation across the states. They believe that America is under attack from demons, and that these demons are creating the cultural and religious, destroying the cultural and religious fabric of America. The way that they see this evil agenda is through words such as end racism, redistribution of wealth, and open borders. They believe that Marxism is propaganda that is destroying the country. And they also believe that this ultimate battle will bring forth the end times. And America, as a Christian foundation and a Christian nation, will rise up. And those who were aware will actually save the world and live in 1,000 years of peace. They believe that Roe versus Wade was a demonic victory for your country. They believe that the critical race theory and the 1619 Project are also active engagement by demons in America. And they believe that there is an attack on religion and an end by who they believe are what they call the woke, is because during the pandemic, they shut down churches. So they think that they're trying to end Christianity in America. No, this movement is linked to something called the Black Robe Regiment. Now, the Black Robe Regiment is a belief that during the Revolutionary War, that ministers were wearing black robes and they led their congregations out to the battlefield and took them from church and brought them out. The thing is, that didn't actually happen, but they believe that it did. Now, they have started where they teach patriot ministers how to be patriotic religious leaders. And their goal is to actually end all evil and demon work in America and create their own sort of sanctuary states and cities throughout the country. Now, on their website, they actually will have conspiracy theories that they link to. So here we see that they believe that 5G and 4G are taking over the world and that they're spying on us. And that is a way for the enslavement. Now, they're trying to believe that there are voices in our heads from Siri or from Hey Google, and that is really the spirit of the demon speaking to us. Now, they link this with very patriotic ideas about how to end socialism and communism in America, and that it is their job to make that end through the religious faith. These are other conspiracy theories that they have had up on their website as well, where they believe that there is a locust invasion that's happening, and that's from the drones, which is also a sign from Revelation. Now, the Black Robe Regiment was started by a minister named Dan Fisher, who was also a former House representative from Oklahoma. He started with a book, and then it became a theater production, and it is a call to return for Christian America. Now, they work together, believing that patriot churches and the Black Robe Regiment will actually change the face of America and create sanctuary states where it is completely and utterly Christian, and that there will be no demon work and no left-wing people. Now, this is an image from their website and how they believe that people who are Christian are being silenced because they're choosing to, and they're not choosing to fight back. So how does this come into action? So if we think about conspiracy theories and we think about religion, how do they come together? Well, after January 6th and the events that happened at the Capitol Hill, a minister, Daryl Knappen from Minnesota, put out a video on his Facebook for his congregation. And he linked back to the idea of the Black Robe Regiment and said that he actually wanted to go on camera in a black robe with his gun underneath the robe. He called for his congregation to rise up and to attack and start shooting and attacking individuals who were involved in the conspiracy theory of Donald Trump not becoming president again. And so he said that there is a need for them to arm themselves and to attack. Now, this is linked to QAnon, to the conspiracy theory of the big lie, but it is a minister having this engagement and telling his flock to do that. Now, he is not the only individual who does this. We have also seen Franklin Graham work with Glenn Beck, and they talk and have engagement and videos online consistently with not just their religious groups, but also the groups who are engaged in very much right-wing television and broadcasts and radio shows. And they link these ideas together that Christian nationalism is America. And the people who are destroying it are those who are in control of the conspiracy theories. Now, they talk about why they start this, and it's because they truly believe that America is being taken over by demons. And so we have seen recently that there is a lot of talk about Christian nationalism in America. A lot of people are saying that Christian nationalism is destroying the country. Well, and that it's a fascist movement and there's an attack and we have to end it. Well, the Christians are actually taking that word back. So Christianity Today, a few weeks ago, actually put this poll out and asked what Christian nationalism was. And these are the answers that they provided. Now, we all know that these definitions are not the words, but they are how they're defining it to their group membership. Now, I can't have this conversation without actually talking about what's happening with Donald Trump and Ye and Nick Fuentes. Now, many are unaware that Kanye or Ye actually had a very strong religious movement of his own. While Donald Trump was in power, he started his own Sunday services at his home. He was working with prosperity gospel ministers, and he would have people come invitation only. They would create gospel music and perform gospel music, and he would have a minister who would preach to them. He had this minister come and give him Bible study lessons continuously. And then, as we know, his marriage fell apart. And with that, Kanye started becoming more and more engaged with both religion and politics. Now, when Donald Trump was still in power, he said that he wanted to run for the presidency at that point in time, but he wanted to wait until Donald Trump had finished his second term. Now, we see Kanye coming out fully discussing very anti-Semitic topics. We saw, I'm sure many have seen what occurred on Alex Jones. But interestingly, an individual named Gavin McInnes, who is a Canadian and who started the Proud Boys, rushed to America to interview Ye and Nick Fuentes right after the Alex Jones interview, that 3-hour interview that happened. And Gavin McInnes believed that he could save Kanye West and stop the hatred against the Jewish community, and that really he should be attacking elites like academic professors or governments or media institutions. Now, they had a very long conversation, and Ye was focused much more so on Christian nationalism in America. Him and Nick Fuentes agreed that anybody who did not believe in God or a Christian God should not hold any power position in America. Now, he did say that the most offensive thing that he said on there, and I'm sorry, this could be trigger warning, he did say that the Jews should just forgive Hitler. But at the same time said that anyone who is not Christian should not hold a power position, nor should they be recognized. And so there is this linkage to what Kanye and Nick Fuentes are actually articulating that is very similar to that which we saw in the rise of World War II. Now, this is not unique, as we're seeing it happen all over the world. We're seeing it happen in Italy. We're seeing it happen here in Canada. Now, there is this linkage where there are populist leaders who are engaging with the religious leaders and with the conspiracy theorists, and they are creating movements. And these movements are powerful when you have people who promise to solve these issues in a political position. Now, the conspiracy theories are more difficult once a person gets into power, which is why QAnon sort of became in existence. Because Donald Trump, who I do not believe is a conspiracy theorist, he just uses it to empower himself and to empower his base. He doesn't actually engage in conspiracy theories as a conspiracy theorist does, where they know every single detail and will be almost scholarly in their production and understanding of that. And so we're seeing that there are problems that are being engaged worldwide. And the reason for that is that the internet is borderless. There are no borders there. And so the movement itself, even though nationalistic, is really a battle against evil. So even though QAnon began in America and is very much about your deep state and what is happening with your politics, we see it spreading. So in Canada, we have the same QAnon ideas, the same battle against the government. Australia and New Zealand picked up on things that were happening in my country during the convoys, and they're all carrying the same flags. The idea is that America will rise up against the cabal that is controlling the demons of America. But if Canada, Australia, and New Zealand fall first, then the rest of the world will start following. And so there is this need in their understanding for America to save the rest of the world. I think I will leave it there. And then if we have any questions, I'll stop sharing. And I'm happy to answer any questions that we may have.
I am not seeing any questions in the chat. And we don't have any in the Q&A. And okay. We do have, so if anybody has any questions, please feel free. Otherwise, oh, wait, hold on. Do you see Ye as the next Alex Jones?
I do not. I think that he will burn out at some point. He probably will run as an independent in 2024, but he's not that guy. No, I think that what Kanye is actually doing is, so in conspiracy theories, when it works with right-wing extremists, what they do is they use political memes. So instead of actually being very vocal about their anger or their ideology or their hate, they'll use memes that are anti-immigration and saving America that way. And so then they can start introducing their ideology. I think that what Kanye is actually doing is providing 1.3 million or 3.4 million people who follow him on all of his social media, he's giving the right-wing people his audience. And that's what he's actually articulating. So I think more so than being a conspiracy gateway, I think that he's actually a gateway to hate ideology.
Let's see. The question here is, have you read Benjamin Rayford's America, the Fearful Media and Marketing of National Panics?
I have not, but I will.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna lie, but I have not. Sorry.
And we also, let's see, a couple of Q&A, but we still want to try to stay on time here. So this one comes from Beth. So if condemning these conspiracy theorists causes them to rally, what does one do to combat them?
Well, I think the way I articulate it is that, if I come to the table and I'm insulting someone and I, call them a name right away or engage that way, the person's going to be on the defensive. I think in ways we need to learn how to talk like human beings again, and not come to the table with arguments, and don't try to get into a debate about whose peer-reviewed paper is right or, whose history is right. We really have to start seeing people as human beings again and engage, almost like I compare it to the show Intervention, where, you don't talk about the alcohol or the drug use, you talk about your feelings. And if fear is fundamentally the part that is the catalyst to understanding or believing in conspiracy theories, then we need to look at what are those fears. So come to the table with your own fears and articulate them and make it a space where people will actually feel comfortable talking about emotions.
Great. Well, and we do have a couple of other questions, and I don't know, I'll just say them, but then we do kind of need to stay on the schedule here. But, one is, do all these theorists believe all the different theories, or do they pick a favorite one? So maybe if you can answer that in the chat. And then how and when did the theories get interwoven? And what would you say is the most important linchpin to combating those ideas? So if you're able to, that would be great. But so that we can stay on schedule, I'm going to go ahead and move on. But thank you so much, especially being sick. You did a fantastic job despite being ill. So we really appreciate you taking time out of your schedule. In the chat, I know Lindsay dropped a link. So if you want to, learn more about some of Dr. Celestini's writings, by all means, support the work that she does. And thank you so much again. All right.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. And then Lindsay, if you want to go ahead and put the slides up again, that would be great. And then Lindsay Love, I know you're here. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. There she is. Yay.
Thank you.
Quite possibly one of my favorite elected officials of all time in Arizona. We focused a lot this year on school boards and supporting our local school board candidates. School boards really are the heart of our democracy, and we've seen Christian nationalists running for these positions in increasing numbers across the state and across the country. These are unpaid positions, and really during the last 2 years, things have kind of escalated, and school board members have received death threats and personal attacks, whether it's over masking or school closures, curriculum, comprehensive sex ed, social emotional learning, you name it, and these people are angry about it. And so we decided to host some candidate forums to highlight the importance of these positions and to hear from candidates about how they will fight against Christian nationalist ideologies as board members. Lindsay Love was elected in 2018, and her term ends at the end of this month. Not only did she stand up to the bullies and advocate for the families and teachers in the Chandler Unified School District, but she also helped other board members get elected and is a mentor to many. So we wanted to honor her today for being a secular champion and thank her for doing so much for the Chandler community. So welcome, Lindsay. Thank you. I hope, did you receive a gift?
I did. I received some very beautiful flowers yesterday. Thank you so much for that.
Good. I just wanted to make sure. And I'd love for you to maybe just talk a little bit about why school boards have become this battleground, and what your experience was like from getting elected and campaigning all the way through the 4 years that you served.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you so much for this award. It's an honor, and I really appreciate Secular AZ for all of the work that you've done. I know, Jeannie, that I've called on you a few times when there have been struggles in my district, and I needed a champion to kind of help challenge the board, especially with some anti-Semitism that was happening in our meetings. It was this year, right? Like not too long ago. And Jeannie rallied and offered support to our district, which unfortunately they did not take, if I'm not mistaken. That's just kind of like the area and the tone of our board. But I really appreciated you coming out and speaking up at those meetings and rallying other folks to speak up from different faith communities as well, to challenge our board. Definitely an embarrassing moment for Chandler, but I was really proud of Secular AZ rallying all the community members to challenge us. So it's an honor to be here today. I think that if you were to tell me 10 years ago that I would have been an elected school board member, I would have laughed. I never wanted to become a politician and serve in a public office. And as a matter of fact, in my college days, I would tell classmates, it's okay, before we went on some kind of drunken exploit, we're not going to run for office and we won't be public figures. And I thank those people for not releasing any stories or photos from those days. But I was a social worker, right? I went to school to be a clinical social worker. If you know anything about being a social worker, policy is something that we have to take into account, especially those of us who work as therapists. We have to just take into account how different policies impact the communities that we work with and serve. And while policy was always something that fascinated me, I had voted in every election I could since the age of 18. Running for public office wasn't something that I ever thought was meant for me or was within my access, right? And I think a lot of people think that, and that is a deterrent for a lot of folks to run for some of these positions like school board or city council, or even certain positions at the ledge. So I was also a micro level community social worker. So I was one-on-one with people. And, I thought I'd be a therapist and, maybe have a private practice and a show I'd own in the same way as Iyanla Van Zant, but an actual therapist. So really it felt like it was outside of my scope. My sister was very much more politically active than I was, and I was not, right? But I ran for public office because I was asked to serve, and with social workers, when we're asked to serve in a role, we figure it out and we adapt to it, right? So for years, I worked in community behavioral health agencies as a therapist, working with children, adolescents, and families. Many of my clients were in the foster care system and had experienced great amounts of trauma and policies that really disrupted their lives. A lot of the work that took place on my caseload was actually inside of schools. So I would observe my clients in the classroom. I worked with the teachers to kind of help them support students throughout the day. And then in my own life, I had my nieces and my nephew who was coming out as trans in the district where I graduated from. And I heard many stories from them and their frustrated parents about what was going on in the district and how it was impacting them day to day and their moods. And my nieces and nephew all struggled with depression. And I had my youngest niece, Quinn, who was about to start school, and it was really disheartening to see her older siblings going through this, and knowing that, you know, that might be her fate, and reading some of the statistics, right, about how our public schools target BIPOC children, right, particularly Black children, right? They're the first ones to be punished, and they're punished more harshly than their white peers. And a lot of their behavioral health issues are seen as more defiance and are treated with punishment and not treated with intervention. So like in that same time, I was asked by a colleague to apply for Emerge Arizona, which Jeannie was a part of too. We were in different cohorts. So Jeannie's my Emerge sister. But this colleague thought that I would be perfect for it because I was talking a lot about like, wow, we have to really do something for these children in these districts. And she was one of the first ones that brought to me like, you know, well, you know, you should apply to Emerge and run for public office and see what you could do to help. Still was not convinced, right? But I thought it would be a great opportunity to kind of understand the political process more and running for office, and also connecting with like some future leaders too. So like as I was filling out my application, they asked like on the application, like which position I would run for. And like my sister was at the table, like helping me to fill it out. Cause like I said, she's more politically active, and I didn't want to sound stupid. I didn't want to sound goofy rather, as I was filling out this application. And, you know, I thought like, you know, oh, well, I guess maybe city council, like, you know, that seemed a little bit more accessible to me just because my parents were really involved in the city. They knew the mayor, they knew council members, just didn't work through their community. And I was like, yeah, maybe I could do something like that, you know, just kind of like cheekily saying that. And my sister looked at me and was like, of course you're going to run for school board. Like we need a social worker on the board at Chandler Unified. We need a Black woman. We need somebody with your knowledge in working with children and families. So I bubbled in the school board, still unsure if I would even run for any office. And I got accepted. And, you know, the cohort was very different because there weren't a lot of people who looked like me. It was mostly like maybe older white women in my cohort. There were a few of us that were young. But there was only like a couple of us that, you know, were Black women. There were no young Black women. So I really felt like out of place there and like I didn't belong. And, you know, my cohort, they all knew what they were going to run for. Like one of them wanted to run for president of the United States. And I felt like this is the wrong room for me to be in, right? And like, while my cohort members, they talked a lot about how they cried over Hillary Clinton's autobiography, I was in the corner connecting with my forever best friend that I met about our mutual love and appreciation for like the yin yang twins and all things millennial. And so I think you could call me like unserious at the time. But I was like nice enough, and I wasn't like, you know, I was passionate, but I wasn't like a disruptor in the way that some of my cohort members were. I was more of a silent disruptor. And so Emerge really invested in me, and I was like, wow, why are they investing in me? And, you know, knowing the stats about school board, that there aren't a lot of people like me that serve in school boards, right? It's mostly our older conservative Christian, like white people who have retired, you know, maybe have had children in the district, but don't currently have children in the district. And there wasn't a lot of room for me. And Emerge really wanted to kind of flip that in a lot of our school board seats. So like eventually too, like after hearing so many stories of like racism and discrimination within my district, I decided to run. But I decided that I wasn't going to run my campaign like any other politician, because I'm not a politician at all. Like I cuss, like, you know, I, you know, have an occasional glass of wine, right? And all the things that Emerge kind of taught us like are no-nos, right? But I wanted to run an authentic campaign, and I was going to wear my natural hair. I was going to be unapologetically Black. I was going to speak about equity. I got like an endorsement from, you know, secular community members too. And I'm a girl who grew up Southern Baptist, but I also grew up as, you know, in a family of like healers who were very accepting and embraced all belief systems and all cultures. And, you know, I was very honored, you know, my father is an engineer. And so I grew up with a love and belief in science first and foremost. And, you know, I was going to bring that truth to my campaign and to the dais. I think I was proud of the campaign that I ran. And I think the campaign that I ran helped inform some of the campaigns that I supported and worked on in this past election cycle, just running as your authentic self. So whether, you know, you're a Tamilia Valenzuela who ran in Washington L with cat ears, or you're a Patti Serrano who ran in Chandler Unified, and, you know, she's our first Latina mom on the school board, but was branded an ethno-socialist by a conservative magazine online. And, you know, just for speaking out in our community about mental health, and because she was at a debate and she spoke Spanish, and apparently that was offensive, and her being inclusive of our LGBTQ students. She still ran her campaign as her authentic self, right? And won, right? And there were not that many like votes in between her and her opponent, who took the top vote and is more of like the conservative, like purple for parents guy, because she ran a campaign that a lot of people could see themselves in. Throughout my 4 years on the dais, I made sure that, you know, when I was on the dais, I represented our community fully, and I represented the ones that hadn't seen themselves represented in the policies that drive our district. I made it a point to get out and talk with community members. I had a very like open door kind of policy. I met with other school board members in other districts to just kind of see what they were doing. And did I get attacked? Yes, I got like death threats, people showing my address online. Somebody took a picture of my back in a restaurant and sent it to me. People making comments about my body. And, you know, people who were upset with me wanting to protect students during the pandemic and be more inclusive of our most marginalized students, like they had a problem with that and deemed me as radical and unsafe to be around children. And these moral panics, they're nothing new, especially in like educational settings. It's just very typical for, you know, folks in, especially in very conservative suburban settings, to target non-Christians, immigrants, non-white people, because that's a very vein of like Christian nationalism, right? It's kind of what's for dinner here in the suburbs. You know, as Jeannie said, like I was also a champion of age-appropriate, medically accurate sex education. I worked as a social worker who saw a lot of children who were sexually abused, and saw many of the cases get thrown out because children did not have knowledge of specific body parts, nor were they able to tell interviewers, forensic interviewers, what happened to them, right? And I saw this as something that was paramount to help our kids, right? Mm-hmm. But I was labeled as dangerous and somebody who was trying to sexualize children. My sister sat on the board of Planned Parenthood at the time, and they brought that in and said I was trying to sexualize children to increase their abortion mills, and trying to turn all children trans, right?
Lindsay,
yeah,
I'm really sorry, because I could listen to your story like the whole day. But I do need to stick with the agenda. And I absolutely agree. And I hate when, you know, they use that term groomer, or they say that that's what we're trying to do, because we know the stats, we know all of the research says that it actually keeps kids safer. So I do really appreciate you taking the time. I hope you like the flowers. I don't know, they spoke to me.
They were beautiful. I hope that I provided enough, and that was really my experience. But you know, I'm here to help and support. Like, me getting off the dais doesn't mean that I go away and I stop doing the work.
Yeah. Well, we all know that about you. And again, thank you so much for putting up with all that you did. And I want to point out too, up until I think it's Abby Klavacek, those are the candidates that won, and we just want to express gratitude as well for, you know, Jacob and Marcy and Mesa Public Schools and all the other folks who ran and didn't, or wait, actually, as Craig Beckman is where we start, I believe. So anyway, I just want to say thank you. It is a dirty, thankless job, but it's also one of the most rewarding jobs I ever had. You know, one of the most rewarding professional experiences being on my school board for 8 years. So thank you, Lindsay. And I'm going to go ahead now and transition. You have a great day. Take care.
You too.
All right. So sorry. 6 minutes over time. And I thought it was going to be RT, you know, that went overtime, but no, it's me. So I'm really excited today to have this panel discussion talking about leaving cults and conspiratorial thinking behind. We have some great guests. I can't see the, you know what? I'm just going to let you folks go ahead and introduce yourselves really quickly. So I'm just looking at my screen and I see Nick first. So, or there's Gloria right there. So Gloria, if you want to just give a brief introduction, everybody can read it over there.
Hi, I'm Gloria Beth Amodeo. I've written the book God's Ex-Girlfriend that will be coming out in February of 2023. I grew up secular. Actually, you know, I went to a pretty progressive Catholic church when I was growing up, so relatively pretty secular. But when I was in college and I was in a particularly vulnerable time in my life as a freshman due to a lot of things happening in my childhood, I was converted to evangelical Christianity over the course of a year, a very slow year in which seeds were planted in my mind by people that I admired and I looked up to. So I ended up leaving the movement after 7 years after being a pretty, you know, ardent believer and being very, very involved in trying to convert everybody that I knew to evangelicalism as well, because I had been trained to do that by an organization known as Campus Crusade for Christ that is on college campuses all across the country, around the world, and is in the military and our government and all types of crazy places. So anyways, I wrote a book about it, about my 7 years in the movement and what it took, how I got converted, and then what it took to leave.
Great. And if you could go to the next slide. Let me see. There we go. Nick, you want to go ahead, and Nick Carmody, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself briefly?
Hi, I'm Nick Carmody. I am a psychotherapist in Denver, Colorado. I have a law degree and I'm a member of the Illinois Bar, but I don't practice. And I have a Master's of Science in Psychology that kind of allowed me to stumble into a little bit of a public platform writing about the psychology of pathology and politics, and really just trying to understand the state of the country as kind of seen through the lens of the political climate. I basically just try to analyze the psychology and in some cases the neuroscience behind what we're dealing with all of the division and all of the damaged relationships that we have as a result of our politics.
Great, thank you. And then Stephanie, do you want to just go ahead and give your brief introduction of yourself?
Yes, I am currently blue-pilled. I'm formerly a red-pilled conspiracy theorist. And I also enjoy kind of studying conspiracy theories and writing about them, because I remember that connection, that fun connection I used to have with them. But I think the most important thing is to educate people about conspiracy theories, where they come from, how they evolve. And it's also important, I feel, to share excuse me, my story of recovery, because it is linked intrinsically to mental health. And so I've kind of become an advocate, you know, for a kind of behavioral contagion experiment where I want to see how many people will also speak out. I want to give others courage so that we can kind of, because right now conspiracy theories are like the new norm. So I kind of want to make it normative for it to be okay to once have been a conspiracy theorist.
Great. So the way that I see doing this is, you know, I have a bunch of questions that Diane Post, our head of legal, put together for us, and then you all can just kind of jump in if the question speaks to you, and if you want to answer it. And again, of course, people in the audience, if you'd like to put any questions into the Q&A, that's welcome and encouraged. So let's get this party started. So let's see. How can one confront conspiracy theories since they have no basis in reality? Fact studies, expert opinions don't have any impact because they just say they have other facts, usually undisclosed because they don't exist. So the question again was, how can one confront conspiracy theories since they have absolutely no basis in reality?
I'll take a stab at that. Well, it's actually an example as an answer. There is a gentleman who went on a conspiracy theory show and fed the host of that show wild, crazy conspiracy theories that he knew she would believe, but he also injected like trans positive messages. Oops, sorry, that was my cat. And so he kind of, it was a gentle trolling, like, here's the story that you can believe, but I'm going to insert progressive messages. And I think, and the name that he went by was Solomon Berg. And if you're interested in hearing about it, there's 2 episodes about him on Knowledge Fight podcast. And what he did, I think, was so brilliant, was using it almost like a psyop. He was using their narrative against them to push like a progressive message. And I think that could be one way, but that's, you know, that's something that would take a lot of time. But I think another thing is also to kind of start from a centrist position. Like I tell people, try and watch the show Inside Job or South Park, because there are jokes in there that like both sides can laugh at, and that might, you know, pop culture can actually possibly help us open up a dialogue.
And then if anybody else wants to weigh in on that one, please feel free.
Yeah, one of the difficult things about conspiracy theories is oftentimes, you know, it's a situation where the more the problem is fixed, the worse it gets. So if you think about in terms of like Trump and the deep state, if you know, if the conspiracy is that there's this deep state that's out to get Trump, then anytime that legal accountability or investigations get closer to holding him accountable, if the problem is Trump or his corruption, any progress that is made towards holding him accountable actually feeds the conspiracy itself. So it's actually a situation where oftentimes anything that counteracts the conspiracy is proof of the conspiracy itself. So it tends to be very circular in its reasoning, and it can be very difficult to counteract.
Yeah, do you want to? Yeah.
I think that's something that's really interesting about what everybody's saying about the difficulty to counteract, and also something that kind of speaks to what you were talking about, Stephanie, is I think that, you know, from the standpoint of what I was involved in and from the standpoint of evangelicalism, something that I feel like we can almost, so one of the ways to fight conspiracy theorists and also just like high control group thinking is by kind of like using some of their own tactics against them. For evangelicals, something that, you know, drew me into the movement, and that was, you know, I talked about this in my introduction, is the slow amount of time in which I was converted. Now, there are two types of evangelicalism conversion. There's relational evangelism, and then there's another kind of evangelism where you're just kind of like approaching people like on a beach or on a sidewalk, called initiative evangelism. It was relational evangelism that was done to me. So basically people formed relationships with me, and slowly over time they sort of planted seeds in my mind until I you know, kind of like became familiar with the beliefs, and they didn't seem, even though the beliefs were kind of weird and kind of like outlandish, they didn't seem as weird and outlandish because they'd been planted so slowly in my mind. And also the people that I was forming relationships with, not only did they seem like, you know, kind of like normal people, but they respected me. And I think that is like, and they formed a relationship with me so that I felt as if like, you know, it wasn't, they weren't against me. They didn't see me as like, you know, sort of like a strange person. They actually formed like a real solid friendship with me before, you know, eventually like I kind of gave into their beliefs because I wanted to be more a part of their world. And I do think that there is some merit to, you know, when you meet somebody who's a conspiracy theorist and who is like, you know, showing, you know, these and saying these things that you're just like, well, that's wild. Like, if we actually really want to combat conspiracy theories, I think that we have to acknowledge and see the person behind the conspiracy theories and sort of like, you know, show them that you can see the good in them, you can see the rational in them, you can see the person behind them, and like, you know, to give them like respect and to find the areas that you can relate with them on, so that like over time, like maybe we can drag them out of this thinking or encourage them out of this thinking by like forming that relationship with them. Because I think that so much of what makes people fall into conspiracy theories to begin with is just feeling like the world may be against them in certain ways.
This makes me want to jump to this question here. Is there, have you found in, you know, your experiences, is there a psychological profile of the type of people who get into cults who were not raised in one? And I mean, really, I would say that one's, I would go to you first, Gloria.
So I'm so interested in what Nick and Stephanie have to say as well about this. From my personal experience, there was, and from the people that I converted over time, there was no psychological profile. There was just a psychological attribute, which was vulnerability. Like, it was all about finding people who were vulnerable, and that could have been so many different things. That was everything from the star football player of the university to like the weirdest girl who wore her pajamas every day to the cafeteria, like, which is what a lot of college students do, but this girl was different. Like, we targeted everybody, like, and it didn't matter how vulnerable they are, because at the end of the day, the goal of evangelicalism is to convert the entire world and to get votes, like, and by converting people to then therefore get votes for the far right agenda. So we didn't care who it was, but we wanted the football player because he would be influential, but we also wanted the weird girl in sweatpants because she was still a vote, like, and she was still a part of the agenda at the end of the day. And so the weird girl in the sweatpants, it was like, okay, like, we want her, she's obviously vulnerable, let's try to form a relationship with her. And then the guy who was, you know, on the football team, we were like, okay, what's going on in his life? Has he had a breakup right now? Like, maybe we can like go and get in there. So it wasn't as much ever to me, like, in my own situation, what we did and what was done to me, it wasn't about like, you know, a psychological profile. It was just about like where you're at in your life and where we can poke holes.
And Nick and Stephanie, if either of you want to weigh in on that one, do you find that there's like a kind of a profile?
I don't know if there's a specific profile, but I think to follow up on the previous point is that, whether it's, you can think of the terms of, and I've written some stuff on this as far as extremism and whether it's, veterans, ex-military with militias, or whether it's even, it could be street gangs, as I think oftentimes it's people who are lacking some type of connection. And when they feel like they're presented with a sense of community, a sense of understanding, a sense of belonging, I think that's where the vulnerability plays in, or some type of a sense of acceptance. And to that point, this is where it gets, I think, difficult to pull out of it. Is, there's research in fMRI technology that shows that the same areas of the brain that activate when we experience physical pain also activate when we experience social isolation or exclusion. And so what this would suggest is that there's almost a pain avoidance like experience when we remove ourselves or isolate ourselves, or maybe even push up against or challenge a group from which we derive identity from, because of the difficulty that it is to deal with that social isolation or that exclusion. So, I think a big part of that is, people are looking for some type of community. I saw a stat earlier this week where right now 1 in 7 men don't have a single friend, not a single friend. And it's 1 in 10 for women. And that, that's a really depressing stat. And so when someone comes along and they have, some type of shtick or some type of recruitment plan, and you're somebody who doesn't have anybody in your life, it can be, that's where the vulnerability comes in. It can be very appealing, and you could be, to hear, whatever the sales pitch might be to a certain idea or just to a certain community.
Well, and it makes me think too about, these people who travel all over for these Trump events or Reawaken America tour. Like, it's almost like back in the day when, we would try to see how many Grateful Dead shows we could go to, right? But now it's like they're following their favorite band around. Their band is really bad, but not just bad, dangerous, inciting violence in some cases. But I guess it's that sense of belonging, and like you get to see your bros, all over the United States, and I guess compare stories or whatever. Again, if anybody does have any questions, please go ahead and put them in the Q&A, but I still have a whole bunch more. This is actually a good question, because we're talking not only about conspiracy theorists, but we're talking about churches and cults and all that kind of stuff. Is every cult based on the inferiority and subjugation of women?
Well, there was the Dove of Oneness. That was, she was a head of a cult. She was kind of in charge of that. And with the Rajneesh was in charge, but Sheila, she was like, I call her the vice president of Salmonella, but I mean, she was pretty high up in there. So I think, but a large portion, I think, really are. In fact, my friend and co-host actually was part of the FBI sting for the Lebrecht and Herod sex cult case. And he spent hours and hours and hours testifying in court. You can see his face change when he talks about it, the pain. The majority are, patriarchal, but I mean, and we have Romana in Canada, Queen Romana, she's got her RV and her little traveling band of cultists. So, I mean, but from what I've seen, it's mostly men.
Yeah, I think I just try not to speak in absolutes. I think it's dangerous to any time to speak with, or all or every, anything like that. For one, you're just not aware of everything that's out there, but two, just it just is not, it's not very disciplined to kind of think or speak in those terms. So I try to stay away from that type of framing.
Yeah, I hear that. It is, and I think that I also had the same reaction of like, I don't want to like frame everything as like every all, because I could never know how many cults there are out there. There could be cults that we don't even know exist right now that are just starting to form that aren't necessarily. But what I think is interesting about this question about the inferiority and subjugation of women, and I think that is so common like within cult culture, is that I think that a lot of like the cults and the high control groups that we see today, the reason why they have an element of inferiority and subjugation of women, even when they are led by women, is or on the outside and the outside led by women, is because our culture, Western culture, is very much ingrained and based in the inferiority and the subjugation of women. Like we are only attracted to things that seem familiar to us. And so when people are joining these cults, like I truly believe that it is because they are seeing elements that are currently within culture, messages that they are currently getting within culture that are just highlighted and magnified within cults and within high control groups. And because of that, like either they're attracted to it or these things just don't seem as bad as they actually are, because they're already interacting with those thoughts like in the secular world. You know, I know for me, something that I talk about in my book is the fact that when I was a teenager, far before I had ever converted to evangelicalism, I went to a nightclub, like this under 21 nightclub, and I totally lied to my parents. And I was like, oh yeah, I'm sleeping over someone's house. And I actually went to an under 21 nightclub and like a little halter top. And I was like, look at me. And I was like 14. And I showed up at this nightclub, and it was just one of the most like, for me at the age of 14, embarrassing, like sort of like patriarchal experiences. Just people, all men were just touching me without my permission. I just felt so incredibly uncomfortable. And I never lied to my parents again. And I never ever went back, because I just felt like so disgusted. I felt disgusted with myself just because people had been touching me without my permission all night. And I just hated it. And I felt like I was supposed to like it because that's just what was done. And when I, became evangelical, in a way I felt, oh, I'm protected from that, because these dudes won't even hug me like from the front. Like they're afraid of like my boobs touching their chest. They're only gonna give me side hugs. It was literally a thing like within evangelicalism. They literally wouldn't do that. Like, and so I felt like, I was protected within that culture, but also at the same time, there was something familiar about the idea of being objectified. Like I had been objectified at that nightclub when I was 14, but in a way I was being equally objectified by being told that I can't hug you from the front, or else your boobs are going to touch my chest. And then I'm going to be like ruined for my wife. And you have to wear 3 halter tops over a t-shirt so that I don't see any of your cleavage when I'm standing above you and looking down, because you're going to ruin me for my wife, things like that. Like it was the same message. It was just on alternate sides of the spectrum and also just magnified. So I personally really think that secular culture dictates like high control group and cult culture. And the reason why we see the subjugation of women in all of these high control groups and cults is because it's just present within secular culture.
Yeah, that's actually that's a really good point. Let's see. So, and this one you may speak from personal experience or any research that you've done. Is a person who has escaped from a cult likely to become involved in, say, a more mainline church, or I guess perhaps a more mainline movement, or are they likely to stay away from religion and cults altogether?
I can't really speak to, specifically like a cult or a church thing, but I know, the conspiracy theories are very much like a cult in that you are indoctrinating yourself in part of, an insulated community. And I noticed for me when I was getting out of the conspiracy theories, I was still making connections, but I was doing it with like web sleuthing. And I noticed this huge, almost conspiracy type culture embedded in the true crime community too. And so I think, you know, there is going to be a residue. I mean, at least for me, there was, but you turn it into something, you kind of take that patternicity and kind of focus it elsewhere. And so I think there is an intermediary when we're in, you know, recovery. And I've suggested, you know, if QAnon is so into saving children, why don't they get a NamUs account? It's free and you can try and solve mysteries online. You know, turn that energy into something real. You want to save the children? Here, maybe you recognize this missing person. Maybe you can match this unidentified deceased person with a missing person and give a family closure, you know? So I think it's all a matter of kind of recognizing what brought us in, what held us there, and how we can use that when we get out.
Nick, did you want to add something?
I think it depends on the person. I mean, we've seen like Ginny Thomas, she seems to have gone. I know Steve Hassan there's a video of Steve Hassan working with her, talking with her decades ago, and she's kind of seemed to have transitioned from one cult or conspiracy theory to another. And I'm sure, you know, as our panel, there's others who, you know, once they're in, they're out, they don't want anything to do with anything like that again. So yeah, I think it's hard to make blanket statements. It depends on the person.
Yeah, it definitely does. And it reminds me of what Nick was talking about with sort of like what draws people in, like in terms of vulnerability and community, seeking community. I think that, you know, so of all the people that I have seen like leave evangelicalism, and there's been a lot of people that I was involved in evangelicalism with who have left, and a lot of people have stayed in, but of the people who have left, I would say it's about half and half in terms of who's like gone off to a more mainline faith system and religion, and those who have just kind of left altogether. And I personally left altogether. I never wanted to go back to a church just because I kind of felt like I spent 7 years of giving my time and my money to churches, and I just didn't want to do it anymore. Like I was just kind of like, I want to do other things with my time. Like, but if I was still seeking community, I may have been more inclined to get involved in a church. Like, and I know that a lot of people that I know who have left, you know, still gain a lot from being involved in mainline churches in the community, and also the service aspect, because that's, I think, one of the beautiful things about mainline churches is there is like a service aspect that's very different from evangelicalism service. And evangelicalism service is all about converting people, whereas service in more mainline churches is actually about like, you know, doing stuff in soup kitchens and like caring for the community around you. So I think it just, yeah, it depends on the person. It depends on what they need at that point in their life. And also, you know, what they're willing to let go of and what they still need to hold on to in terms of spiritual beliefs, like what they want essentially.
Yeah, there was a brief moment when my children were small that I thought, well, they should go to church. I was never raised to go to church or anything like that, but because I had, you know, a couple of toddlers, I thought it was important. And I ended up at the Unitarian Universalist Church. And, you know, a lot of the folks there had grown up with religion, and it was the fellowship that they wanted, you know, and they would do real service work in the community. And to be quite honest, a lot of the discussions, the majority of the discussions had absolutely nothing to do with God, but it just had more to do with current events and maybe morality. Like that was basically it. And you know, you brought up money, so I want to ask this question: when the cult requires you to turn over wealth, like say Scientology or just like the Mormon Church, you're expected to tithe 10%, whatever. When a cult requires you to turn over all your wealth, so that if you leave in poverty and often legally harassed for years, what can motivate a person to leave in those cases?
The only thing I think that can motivate a person to leave in those cases is seeing life on the outside and like really coming to understand that it is a better life on the outside. It is better to be free, and also to see examples of how other people were able to build their lives up afterwards. I think that this is where communities of people like who have left, like, you know, for evangelicals, there's a huge like ex-evangelical community. I know that there's communities for people who have left sort of more Orthodox Judaism communities and stuff. Like there's Footsteps in New York City. There's a bunch of stuff where people, you know, are really like have been forced to be entirely dependent on the sort of radical religious spiritual community. If they can see that there is life afterwards and that there are people who have put resources together to help them get out of it, then that is a motivating factor. Because I think that a lot of times one of the things that keeps people in these faith systems is believing that there's no one outside of it who's ever been able to do life outside of it well. I know that in evangelicalism, you're very much cut off from stories of people who have left the faith system. People who have left are kind of shunned or not listened to. You're kind of taught to shut your mind off to them and not really give anything they say much credence, because evangelicalism doesn't want you to know what they have to say. They don't want you to know that they are living a good, full, beautiful life without their white male patriarchal version of God. So it's really those groups being able to reach back into that community, which is really difficult because I don't think those groups really they want to cut themselves off from those communities. They don't really want to reach back into them, but it's the visibility standpoint. And that's where I think it's really difficult, is those groups don't want to re-traumatize themselves and reach back into those communities necessarily. And people who are in the communities are, you know, the structure is designed to keep them from seeing those people.
Yeah, I recall a documentary about, I think they call them the Lost Boys. Here in Arizona, you know, we have a large LDS population, generally speaking, but then in the northern part, there's also this fundamentalist. There was actually just a big article in the paper about a bunch of underage girls as young as 9 who were married off to much, much older men. But phenomenon on some of these like compounds, right? They kick the boys out at a certain age because then they're competition. And there's whole networks of folks who support those boys being able to just survive. You know, there's basically group homes for them. You know, and then I've seen before, you mentioned the kind of shunning that takes place. There was a documentary many years ago about, was it Rumspringa, right? Where the Amish leave the home and they have a year to experiment with all the things, and then they come back. And if they don't come back, well, then they're shunned for the rest of their lives if they leave the community. Looks like we do have a question here from Greg. From the perspective of healing and reaching out, it seems to me that if I were sitting across from a conspiracy theorist and wanted to find common ground, or at least to understand where they're coming from, I would be very interested in the fears behind their beliefs and actions. Fear leads to protection. How much do you think fear is central to this type of thinking, or is it already obvious?
I can take that one. Fear is absolutely important. It's they call it the FUD model: fear, uncertainty, and doubt. They sell you this fear, and they give you, and they instill the uncertainty and the doubt in you. And the person selling you this fear is also selling you the cure. Like Alex Jones is an excellent representation of that type of model. But fear is so important because there's a fear of control. Everything's under control. But if you acknowledge that there are random coincidences, which there are, then there's fear of lack of control. And everything is just fear. Great replacement theory, fear, socialism, fear, all of, I mean, the John Birch Society was founded on fear. And it's such a big part. And if you can deal with that fear in a logical and really honest, self-reflecting manner, then you can kind of overcome it, or at least understand where it's coming from. But fear is very central to conspiracy theories and cults and abusive relationships as well. It's what brings you there, and it's what keeps you there.
Yeah, fear. There's been studies with fear, exposure to chronic stress and chronic fear will literally rewire the brain in a way where subsequent stressful or fearful experiences will be experienced at a higher intensity level for a longer duration. And one of the things that happens when we are emotionally incited is that the amygdala is the area of the brain where we experience emotion, and our prefrontal cortex is where we exercise judgment and logic and reason. So when we become emotionally incited, the amygdala hijacks the prefrontal cortex, and obviously in order to think critically about a conspiracy theory or really anything, you have to engage your prefrontal cortex. But if you are incited, if you're scared, if you have high anxiety, if you're constantly hearing Tucker Carlson tell you that when they come for you and they will, then it becomes really difficult to think rationally and logically and use critical thinking skills, because the emotional center of their brain is just hijacking the area of their brain that we need to think critically, that may allow us to see a conspiracy theory and say, that doesn't add up, it doesn't make sense, that doesn't align with logic or reason.
Yeah, Greg goes on to say in the question and answer, it seems to me that having and expressing curiosity about another's fear could soften things. That actually does sound like it could be a good idea. Maybe we could all try it as we sit around the table this holiday season and ask our QAnon uncle, what are you afraid of? All right, let me see. I don't see any other questions in the chat, so I'm going to go back to my little list here. Let's see. Well, this is a really good question. What is the impact of homeschooling on cult formation and joining? And I don't know if you all can necessarily answer this, or if it's something that you've pondered before, but that's a great question.
I think it's integral. Like, you think of quiverful families, which is, I don't know if everybody knows about quiverful families, but they're basically families that are in this sort of in a subset of evangelicalism that believes you need to have your quiverful, which is like your arrows. You need to have a ton of arrows to do battle, which means that they just have a ton of children, which are their arrows, and then they generally homeschool them. And I think that the thing that's so sad and so heartbreaking about homeschooling within evangelicalism is it's basically doing everything that you do within a church to adults in terms of taking them and just completely secluding them from the rest of the world, isolating them. And you're doing that to little children from the time that they are babies and their brains are just beginning to form. It is so heartbreaking. As someone I have infant twins, they are just about to turn 9 months old, and I'm seeing their brains do all of the things, just starting to grab things and look at me and laugh and listen to my words. It kills me to think that there are families that are doing this to little babies and just and isolating them, and as their brains form and as their brains start making all of the neural connections. I think I read somewhere that the first within the first every day when a child's baby, maybe Nick knows more about this, but that they're making 100,000 neural connections a day or something like that. And that, they're isolating them from that young of an age and essentially brainwashing and indoctrinating them. As somebody who converted later on in life, I can only speak to it so much, but I know from a lot of people that I've interacted with and spoken with over the past few years, as I've delved further into the ex-evangelical community, that many of them grew up in the movement. Many of them were brainwashed from a very young age. Many of them were homeschooled and were harmed deeply from that. And honestly, my hat goes off to them, because I think they fought harder than anybody that I know to get out of the movement.
Well, and here now in Arizona, the legislature, the conservative legislature, decided to put forward this massive voucher expansion, where you can apply to take $7,000 out of our public schools and put it towards either private school education or homeschooling. So, you know, before, homeschooling was a decision that people would make and they would juggle things around so that they could do that for their families or whatever. But now I'm subsidizing, you know, first of all, private school education in Arizona is $25,000. So that $7,000 is really just, you know, a taxpayer subsidy for a down payment for private school education. And now if you've got 6 kids at home, you know, you can get $7,000 per kid. And there's no testing, there's no standards, there's no curriculum, and I'm paying for it. You know, they could be teaching little girls that their only mission in life is to, you know, be subservient to men, right? And it is 12:45, and I'm sorry, because we did start a little bit late. So I just want to see if, you know, the 3 of you would like to close with anything.
I just wanted to thank the other panelists for the work that they've done. And Bruce, I read David Gilbert's excellent Vice article. David is an amazing writer, and I love the article that he wrote about you, and I love the work that everyone is doing, and I think it's very important.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much to the 3 of you for joining us today. I really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedules. If there's anything that you would like to promote, I know Lindsay's probably been putting some things there in the chat. I have pre-ordered your book, Gloria, so I'm looking forward. I think it's supposed to be out in February, if I'm not mistaken. So if there's anything that you'd like to promote, please feel free to put it in the chat. And thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
All right, and with that, we're going to go ahead and move on to the next piece. Today, we are going to be speaking to Bruce. And Bruce, I'm sorry, would you tell me how to pronounce your last name?
Sure, it's Gorenser.
Gorenser, okay.
Yep, it's Hungarian.
Okay, and I don't really even remember where I stumbled on an article about you. Maybe it was the Vice article that that Stephanie was talking about. But we can see the bio right here. But if you'd like to just go ahead and introduce yourself. I mean, today we got about 15 minutes. So we just want to really hear about your journey from being an evangelical pastor to being an atheist.
Okay, well, I'll let my talk be my introduction. That's probably best with that amount of time. Look, I guess the best place to start is, yeah, I'm an old guy. I'm 60, will soon be 66 years old. I've got a lot of story to tell, but evangelicalism, my experience with it goes back to 60 years ago to the early 1960s. My mom and dad packed us all up, and we lived here in rural Northwest Ohio, not far from where I live today, and packed us up and moved us all the way to San Diego, California. And my dad, a truck driver, thought he would find that proverbial pot of gold at the end of the rainbow in California in the 1960s, and so off we went. And while there, my parents started going to a church, Scott Memorial Baptist Church in El Cajon, California. At the time, I think it's Shadow Mountain Community Church is its name now. And it was pastored at the time by Tim LaHaye. Tim LaHaye was the author of the Left Behind series of books, along with Jerry Jenkins. And he was also the author of the seminal sex manual for evangelicals called The Act of Marriage, a book that my wife and I were allowed to read 6 weeks before we got married. We could not look at that book before then. And so he was famous for those things. My parents made what we call in Baptist circles, a public profession of faith. And And during that same time, they also got involved with the John Birch Society. And so my parents not only were fundamentalist Christians, but they were also, politically very much to the right, typical of the day, quite racist, quite bigoted. So that set the groundwork for me. As a 5 or 6 year old boy, we started going to church 3 times a week. And every time the doors were open, we were there. And after a few years, we did not find that pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. And back to Ohio we came. And what we brought back with us from California was that fundamentalist Christianity. And every place we moved, and I moved a lot as a child, numerous schools, houses, and we went to, fundamentalist churches, primarily independent fundamentalist Baptist churches, or the acronym is IFB. It is a large subset within evangelical Christianity. Millions of people attend IFB or IFB adjacent churches. And I'll talk a little bit about that in just a minute. At the age of 15, at that time we were living in Findlay, Ohio, I went forward during a revival meeting and professed faith in Christ and, was saved. And the next week I was baptized. And then the following week, I felt the prompting of the Spirit of God and believed that God was calling me to preach. And so I went forward again at church and said, I believe that, God wants me to be a preacher. And so that was that, and the trajectory of my life was set for the next 35 years. At the age of 19, I went a little bit north here to Pontiac, Michigan to attend a small independent fundamentalist Baptist college, Midwestern Baptist College, about 400 students. While I was there, I met my wife. She was an IFB preacher's daughter, and we were at Midwestern about 3 years, and through a series of events. I remember that active marriage book I was talking about does play a part here, because 6 weeks after we were married, Polly came home one day and said, I'm pregnant. And we missed the chapter on birth control, evidently. And so we started family with family very early in our marriage. And that led to various things. And so we left Midwestern and moved back to Northwest Ohio. And I started working as an assistant pastor in a local church about 15 miles from where we live now. And over the course of 25 years, I pastored churches in Ohio and Texas and in Michigan. Some of them were IFB churches, others were Southern Baptist, Christian Union, non-denominational churches, but all of them were evangelical. One of the previous panel speakers mentioned the fact about quiverful, and we were quiverful. I wish I had more time to tell that story, because I think, people might find that interesting, but needless to say, we have 6 children, and, we bought into the whole quiverful thinking. We were Calvinists at the time, and so it fit well with our theology. And so that was pretty much the arc of my life for 25 years. It was pastoring churches. I didn't doubt. I was a true blue believer. And then at the age of 50, everything changed. And by then I had decided to leave the ministry. I was tired, burnt out, worn out, broke, and decided, hey, let's do something else. And so there was a period of a couple of years there where I started thinking a little bit more about my beliefs. And the first thing that came into question was my belief that the Bible was inerrant and infallible. And so I began reading about that, came across the books of Bart Ehrman, and well, that was pretty much the end of that belief. You know, the Bible, I couldn't sustain the belief the Bible was inerrant and infallible. It is not a rational position. You just can't, if you look at the evidence, the historicity of the Bible, and the various issues with it, it's impossible to say that the Bible is without error and is infallible. So once that house, that all came crumbling down for me, you know, it became easier for me to start looking at other beliefs that I had. And so here were these beliefs that I had all. Listen, I from a young child to 50, I was deeply immersed in the evangelical church. So, you know, it was difficult for me to start to re-examine these beliefs and ask myself, what is it do I really believe? Do I really believe that virgins can have babies? No. Do I really believe that dead people can come back to life? Do I really believe that humans can walk on water, can walk through walls, can transport themselves from one place to another like Jesus did? And so, you know, bit by bit, all the miraculous claims of the Bible kind of fell away. And I was left with then asking myself, okay, what's left? You know, and the answer is nothing. Once those beliefs were gone, I couldn't honestly say that I was a Christian. I tried, as a lot of people who deconvert from evangelicalism do, I tried the various, hey, let's try the emergent church. And then from there it was, hey, why don't we try to be liberals and progressives? And, you know, all those things lasted for a while. And then, you know, it got to the place where, boy, I guess we could be universalists, you know, that would still keep us. And at that point, and my wife was on a similar path. I tell people not the same path, but we're in the same zip code anyways. Let's put it that way. And we reached a place, and I reached a place where I said, you know, we've taken this reductionist approach to religion to such a degree, and we've jettisoned all of these historic beliefs. And finally, you wake up one morning, you say, why bother? There's nothing left meaningful to this. Oh, Jesus, yay, and that's it. So in November of 2008, so that was 14 years ago, we were attending United Methodist Church here in the small community that we live in, and we walked out the doors of the church for the last time, never to return. For a while, I claimed to, you know, I was an agnostic. I seemed to, you know, I just couldn't bear to claim that I was an atheist. It just seemed harsh to me. And, you know, but after 6 months of explaining to people what an agnostic is, you know, everybody had to, you know, you had to explain it to everyone. You know, I finally said, you know, what I really am is an atheist. And so from that point forward, I claimed the atheist moniker. And so I've spent the last 14 years then. I started my blog back when I was still a Christian, nominally so, still a Christian. And I've spent the last 14 years of, you know, trying to help evangelicals who have questions and doubts about Christianity, or people who have left the faith. And that's my purpose, not to spar with apologists or zealots. And believe me, I get a lot of mail and a lot of comments, and I'm surprised there's not a couple of these trolls that stalk me across the internet in attendance today. I know one gentleman wrote a blog post why he was upset for some reason he couldn't sign up for the seminar, and for some reason he got blocked. And I'm glad he's not in attendance, but so you know, there's a lot of negativity that comes with it. But the fact is that I love the fact that I can help people, and yeah, it's great not to be worried about trying to save people's souls and whatnot. You can just try to help people where they are and answer their questions. And so that's kind of where I am today. And my wife says, she's sitting right across from me, by the way. I told her, I says, I need somebody in the audience to talk to. And so she tells me I have 1 minute left. So.
Well, there's just a few questions here. Somebody, Oliver wants to know, where in Ohio are you? He's from Worcester.
Okay, well, we're a couple hours west of Worcester in the far northwest corner of Ohio. 50 miles west of Toledo, 45 miles northeast of Fort Wayne. And so if you drive 15 minutes north, you hit Michigan. If you drive 15 minutes west, you hit Indiana. So we're way up in the corner. Used to be called the Great Black Swamp, and before they drained it in the 1850s. So that's where we live.
I'm going to just do one more because Diane Post, our head of legal, is going to be giving a little legal update of our activities this year. But this is really a good question. Jackie says, I have brought up what I feel is trauma related to moving out of my parents' house and giving up Christianity with my therapist. I felt I was dismissed, as all kids who leave home learn new things. Would you have any advice for how to advocate for myself better about how worldview changing it was and how it impacted every aspect of my life?
Oh, sure. Well, I can tell you I've been seeing a therapist for over a decade on a weekly basis. And one of the challenges when dealing with counselors and therapists is finding someone that understands religious trauma, particularly the trauma that comes from being involved in evangelical or fundamentalist religions. And sometimes it takes a while to find somebody that can actually understand what you're talking about. And I remember early on, I would tell my therapist certain stories about things that we experienced or we did in our lives. And I could watch her eyes just get a little bit bigger, like, she almost didn't believe me that I was, telling these things that we believed and practiced and whatnot. And so I think you have to find someone who's willing to listen and realize when you grow up in a religious environment where I don't use the term brainwashing, when you're indoctrinated and when there's this conditioning that goes on all the time, that leaves a deep, lasting mark and scar on your life. And it takes time to unravel all of that to get the help that you need. And I'm still finding things to deal with in my own life from my long years in fundamentalist Christianity. So I'm a big fan of secular therapy.
Well, I think that probably everybody here would be a fan of that as well. So thank you so much, Bruce. I really appreciate it. I could have probably asked you a million more questions,
sure.
But our time is jam-packed today. So thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule. I encourage everybody to check out Bruce's website and learn more about him because he's got a pretty interesting story and he does really good work. So thanks, Bruce.
Right. Thank you. You guys have a great day.
You too. And now I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Diane, who's going to give a legal update. Diane, go ahead and take it away.
Hey, you can go straight to the slides, Lindsay. I'm going to talk to you about what's happening on the ground, very concrete things that's happening here as well, because that's just the way that I am. However, I will preface it by saying this, that when I was 15 or 16, I was the president of both the Presbyterian and the Methodist youth group. I don't think it was anything to do with how religious I was. It was a lack of leadership in that little bitty town. So, but there was no fear that I was going to get into a cult for sure. All right, so next slide. We've had 34 complaints this year. Next slide. Oh, just a minute, get it to go, I guess. And they were divided thusly. 19 of them were regarding schools. And as you probably know, if you've been with us for a few years, we've been trying to get to every school district in the state and do public records requests and whether they're violating the law by doing certain things or not. And we've learned a lot of interesting things. But so 19 of the complaints were related to schools. There were 9 related to the government, and they were, Pinal County seems to still be a location of problem. Department of Corrections is also, but it's a mess in every other way. Department of Motor Vehicles, Salt River Project, and the House and Senate and Border Patrol. Now, the other—
Hey, Diane, can I stop you real quick? It's, for some reason, it's freezing up my computer. Are you able to share them yourself?
I can, but it's such a short time, I don't need to. I think I'll just skip it.
Okay, I'll keep trying while you speak.
Okay. So we had problems with 2 officials, and Sheriff Lamb from Pinal County, we had 3 complaints against him. He's also a common person that we get complaints about, and Doug Ducey, who we've complained about for years, and he just never responds to anything. In addition, 5 different complaints about schools and or churches who were hosting political campaign events, which they are not supposed to do. So complaints went to IRS, but also to the relevant election campaign places. I'm on the 3rd slide now. In the previous years, you can see how many complaints we had. So at the very beginning in 2017, it took a while to build up, and then we had a big jump in 2019, and now we're staying pretty much around the same number for this year. And remember that it is only me, and I'm happy if I can get a law student who will do an internship with me. And also, that's all the help I've got. So the next slide. Some of the more interesting cases that we worked on this year, and in many of the schools, the religious clubs, they stopped over COVID, of course. They never started up again. So in many of the schools, they had the Good News Clubs, or they had the Fellowship of Christian Athletes, or See You at the Pole events. Those haven't started up again. So we're just hoping that that's a trend and that it stays that way. One of the most interesting cases, which we did get solved in a week, was that in one school, after the Kennedy decision came down from the United States Supreme Court, the football coach decided that the football players had to come to practice 30 minutes early for a sermon. He had a pastor there who then prayed and read the Bible and gave a sermon. So I'm going to shut off this phone. So then the student, I don't know why it's not going on, told his mother, who was opposed to it, and she contacted us. So when I contacted the school, it was just a time going into the fall break. I don't know why this doesn't go off, but anyway, there we are. So she contacted him and over the break, and it was resolved, and he was told he could not do this. So what he did was he sent out an email to all of the parents telling them, okay, we're not going to do this anymore 30 minutes before the practice. We're going to have it over at this church, and all the football players are required to come. No, you can't do that either. So then I sent that to the school, and they said, okay, fine. And apparently they talked to him again, and he was suspended. So when he came back after the break, the fall break, he got in some more trouble with the booster club, you know, the parents' booster club, and he got some more discipline, and I guess he got mad and he quit. So he's done, and they're not having that, and the kids are very thankful. So that was ended. The religious displays, we had religious displays would pop up here and there, and when I argued with the DMV, they just, well, it's perfectly fine. It's her workspace. She can put them up if she wants. No, she cannot. It may be her workspace, but when it's public facing and it's at a state office, you cannot do that. She could put it up at her own desk in the back. She cannot put it up in the public facing. Well, they continued to say that they weren't going to do anything about it, but I went out there and it disappeared. So it was gone, even though they never admitted that they were wrong. Most interesting, the pine tree flags that you might have seen at the insurrection on January 6th showed up at the house and then disappeared at the House. They showed up at the Senate, and then they disappeared at the Senate. No one seems to know how they got there. No one seems to know how they disappeared. So I guess we could call it a religious miracle. So they're gone now. We hope that this coming year they will not reappear, but we did do public records requests, asked for emails from anybody about discussing this matter, and there was none. So we have no idea where they came from or where they went. So that was one of our most interesting mysteries there. And the case that I'm still working on right now is on a book banning. If you'll remember, in the last legislature, they passed this horrible bill about what materials in school should not be able to be seen by students. Well, it is not a book banning bill. What it says is, if there is material inside of this book that violates what is already our obscenity law, you can hide it somewhere where only students with written permission from their parents can see it. It does not say you can ban the book or take it out of the library or any of that. So I'm dealing with a high school in Glendale where apparently the librarian put it in a separate space, and the students can't find it because they don't know that it's even there. But that's not what the bill says. So I'm dealing with the lawyer right now. They got the lawyer involved right away, and she's saying, well, we have a review, blah, blah. So the idea is, if there is a book that someone complains about, they must look at the material inside of the book. If it violates certain things in the law, which is exactly the same as our current existing obscenity law, then the book has to be taken off the public shelf, and you cannot give it to a student to read or assign it to a student to be read and put in a private place where the only students who can see it would be those who have written permission from their parents. So it's not to be thrown out or burned or any of that other stuff. So if anybody knows of this happening in schools around where you are, please let me know, because that it is, of course, we knew it would be misinterpreted. All right, next. So we got 2 publications out this year. No, so, all right, trainings. We've got 2 lawyer trainings set up this year. The first one is December 15th. Beth Houck is going to be doing that at the Arizona Public Defenders Training. And again, if you remember last year, they passed a religious privilege bill, which basically gives religious people or people who claim to be religious a free get out of jail card. We fought it for 2 years. We won the first year. We lost last year. They got it passed. So she's going to be doing a presentation at that, 2 lawyers about what it means, how you deal with it, blah, blah. And then the State Bar has accepted our workshop for the State Bar Convention in June in Tucson. And the language that's up there for the name of the seminar is actually, they're now opposed to that, and we're probably going to have to change it. But at any rate, that will be taking place in Tucson. Our main speaker is going to be Amanda Taylor, who is a lawyer and the CEO from the Joint Baptist Committee for Religious Liberty. And they have always supported the separation of church and state. And that's what she's going to be talking about. Next slide. We managed to get out 2 publications this year. They're both online. Because we had so many complaints about the churches campaigning and schools campaigning, which they're not allowed to do, we put it online, how to file the complaint with the IRS regarding those churches who do that. Secondly, we put online, so it's on our website, how to file a complaint with the Department of Justice, Office of Civil Rights, because many people want to do it themselves, and you can. So that's up there. Both of these were done by this semester's ASU legal intern, Angelina Manion. And that is my report. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. Yes, if you have any complaints, please, it's one of Diane's favorite things to to file these complaints, and she's really good at it. So let us know if you see something, say something. All right, let's go ahead. We're going to move on to the next part of our summit, and then we're almost done. I'm really, really excited about our next speaker, presenter, Luciano Gonzalez Vega. Welcome. And I don't, you know what, I don't have your bio. Oh, there's the bio right there. But you know what, why don't you go ahead and just share, give us a little introduction about yourself.
Hi, everyone. I hope that I can be heard okay. I recently acquired a new computer, and this is the first time I'm doing a public speaking event with it. I do a handful of public speaking events a year. I'm very lucky in that sense that I have a high enough profile that friends from all over want to hear me chat at their events. But my name is Luciano Joshua Gonzalez Vega. I use my full name because it is a nice name. I very much like it. I am a Puerto Rican atheist activist and secular humanist. I have written for numerous publications over the course of my life. And I am here today to talk about the importance of representation. I have many different takes on the importance of representation. It is one of my favorite topics to write about. Recently, I wrote an article for The Humanist, which is the publication for the American Humanist Association. And that article talked about the importance of mundane secular representation as opposed to high profile, prominent, and in some cases, literally even fantastical representation. And it is a piece that I wrote fairly quickly. I wrote it over the course of about a day and a half. And I thought it was a well-written piece, but I didn't really think that it would catch people's attention the way that it did. I very much appreciate that it captured the imagination of lots of people. And I myself have gained lots of different acquaintances and different organizations throughout the country because of the article. The article talks about the office specifically, but before I really delve into all of this, I would like to talk a little about my background because I think it informs why I care so much about representation. Also, for those of you who are curious, I have a health condition that sometimes makes it difficult for me to speak for long periods of time. So if you see me stop to take a sip of water or to just catch my breath, that is a thing that might happen. I hope that it won't be too much of an issue today. I still very much enjoy public speaking, even though that is an issue that I have. But when I was younger, I was raised by parents who are nominal Roman Catholics, and my parents are still believers. Can the reference that article in the chat? I hope that someone can, if someone can't, at the end when I am about to leave, when I'm about to turn off my video camera, I'll put it in so people can read it. It's only like a 2 or 3 minute read. It's pretty easy to breeze through it. But yes, so when I was younger, I was raised by Roman Catholics who are still very much believers. Most of the people in my family are believers, and my mom and dad are military as well. So I was raised all over the country and in Latin America. So because of this, I was able to see a wide range of media in English and in Spanish. And in a lot of that media, I saw one very common practice. I saw the practice of people saying grace, which I think is a very interesting thing to do. And it's very interesting to me that it appeared in so many different TV shows and in movies. It is almost, I think in a sense that it is a very American practice. And it is something that lots of American Christians think of as something that wholesome families do together. When they're about to eat together, they get together, they say a little prayer. And that is a way of signaling to the audience that you are seeing someone with good family values, people who value togetherness, and people who value, in some ways, prayer and submission to Christ. And growing up as a Roman Catholic, I thought that was a very cute thing. I thought it was very interesting to see people do it because I actually got to see people do it in English and in Spanish. I didn't just get to see people doing it in English like many of the people here probably did, because I would watch TV in Colombia and in Honduras and in Panama, which were 3 of the countries that I spent a significant amount of time in growing up. But the first time that I ever actually saw atheistic representation explicitly on TV actually happened a good deal after I myself became an atheist. I normally start off events like this talking a little bit at length about my personal deconversion, but I don't really want to do that today. Suffice it to say, even though I grew up in a Christian household, I myself was exposed to a wide range of faith practices, and I grew up with lots of different thoughts on religion, even though my mom and dad are Roman Catholic, and they tried to go to church whenever they could, although in Latin America, as Americans, even as Puerto Ricans, that was a little bit trickier than some people might think. We'd have to find churches, and we'd have to figure out where it was that we wanted to go to. We'd have to figure out if it was safe for us to go as Americans. I myself am very distinctly a white individual. My mom and dad are also both white Hispanics, but they look considerably more Hispanic than I do. And when they speak in Spanish, they speak it with a Puerto Rican accent, whereas when I speak it with an American accent. So there are clear indicators that we are not from whatever place we are living in, even if that is in the United States. And in my case, even if that's in Puerto Rico, because I was born and I spent a good portion of my childhood in North Carolina and in Georgia, which is where I'm living right now. I'm in Greensboro, North Carolina, which is actually where I became an atheist. When I became an atheist, I was a young 19-year-old. I had just gone to go see the movie God's Not Dead, and I was attempting to preserve my faith, but that movie really shattered the last little bits of latent Christianity that lingered within me. And even though actually sort of destroying some of the more negative aspects of that have been difficult, because I myself am a queer person, but I was raised in spaces that hate queer people, even though my mom and dad actually didn't themselves. We have family members who do, and there are lots of people in the spaces around us that do. So I learned to be closeted, and I learned about the importance of that. And that lingered with me even after I became an atheist, even after I learned about humanism and about a lot of other important things that have led me to be the human being that I am right now. I am a trans person. I'm also asexual, and I've had to come out of the closet multiple times because deconstructing Christianity and its effects on me has been an ongoing, lifelong journey. And I don't know if I'm ever going to fully finish that journey, although I hope that I do. But the very first time that I ever actually saw a representation of someone who was both a secular humanist and also an atheist actually happened in 2017, which was fairly recently. The very first time that I ever saw representation of myself was not in The Office, although that was the first show that I saw chronologically that featured a character who was explicitly a secular humanist. I was actually watching a show called One Day at a Time, which is a remake of a sitcom from the mid 70s to early 80s, I think. I might be wrong about the remake states, or I might be wrong about the original show states, but that is the original. Yeah, cool. I'm glad I got that right. I had to look it up to remind myself. But the remake was originally a Netflix original that started airing in 2017. And it follows Penelope Alvarez, who is a Cuban American, even though she's played by a Puerto Rican American. And she is a veteran. And in the second episode of the first season, they have an entire plot line that is dedicated to unpacking the fact that she herself has conflicts with her mother over religion specifically. At the climax of the episode, and I recommend people watch the whole show, there's 4 seasons, and the 3rd season is on another network that I can't quite remember the name of, but there's 3 seasons available on Netflix, at least when I last checked a couple of days ago. And it is a fantastic show, especially if you are Latin like I am. I use both Latin and Latinx, but lots of Hispanic people don't really like Latinx. So I prefer to use Latin in conversations where I'm in conversations like this. My pronouns are they, them for the curious, but you can use any pronouns to refer to me, and it's not really an issue. It's just that they, them are the pronouns that I most identify with. Over the course of that particular episode, we get to see Penelope just sort of deal with the fact that her experiences at war altered her worldview. And at the very climax, she explicitly says that she's not sure if she believes. She doesn't talk about being a humanist explicitly, but it's very clear over the course of the show that these are the values that she has. And I personally think that there's something very interesting about that, because a pretty significant plot point is the fact that they send their daughter and their son to a Catholic school, which is very amusing to me, even though I went to multiple different Christian schools over the course of my life, just because my mom is an educator and she would always send me to the best schools. And in the places that I've lived, the best schools are not always public schools. In some cases, they are private schools. Unfortunately, that was not always good, because one private school that I went to in particular taught young earth creationism and biblical literalism and a bunch of other things that would eventually affect my journey as I was searching for representation, and I was unpacking the impact of the beliefs that I once had. So that is very interesting. It is unfortunately a conversation for another time, but I think that there's something very powerful when you see representation like the sort of representation that One Day at a Time offers someone. One Day at a Time is a very specific example, and I am ready to talk about multiple different examples that are hopefully a little bit more accessible to people, because I feel like One Day at a Time is handy just for people like me who are Army children. Penelope herself is a veteran. She talks about that, and her daughter is a young lesbian, and we get to see both of their stories. It is a fantastic show, especially if you are a queer person. I highly recommend it. But the example that I talked about in the article that I actually wrote, which made it possible for me to come here today, is definitely a lot more accessible. In the show The Office, the character Oscar Martinez, who is a Mexican-American accountant for Dunder Mifflin, is himself a secular humanist. This is a very minor plot point that is only ever mentioned actually once explicitly in the show, and even that is in a deleted scene. But in the very first episode of season 4, which is named Fun Run, there is a deleted scene that was supposed to happen, I think, about like 9 or so minutes into the episode. And it has, I really appreciate that image. Thank you for sharing that. What a king. In the show, Michael hits one of the other characters, and he is looking for an excuse. He's looking for something that explains why he ran her over with his car that sort of absolves him of any blame. And he asks the other people in attendance, he asks the other people at a sort of impromptu staff meeting, one of Michael's many inappropriate staff meetings, about their religious beliefs, which I'm sure many of you can imagine is not something that is exactly encouraged in that sort of space. But when he gets to Oscar, he initially assumes that Oscar is either going to be, I think he says, into Santeria or a Roman Catholic, which are two somewhat logical assumptions about the faith of a Hispanic person. But Oscar is very quickly rebuffs that, and he says, I myself was raised Roman Catholic, but I am no longer a believer, and I am a secular humanist, to which Michael responds, ugh. And there's a very short back and forth that happens where it's revealed that Michael does know what secular humanism is, which is not something that I think a lot of people were expecting. I think it works very well as a neat little joke, but it also establishes a sort of character arc for Oscar that gets followed a little bit closely over the course of the show. We get to see him both embrace different aspects of Mexican culture and reject them. And I think the purpose of the scene originally was to lay the foundation for that. Unfortunately, because it's deleted, a lot of people have never actually seen the scene. I only know it because when I was younger, I was a huge The Office fan. And when I actually Googled Oscar Martinez, I was trying to write another article about him because I've written for both Pathos and Free Thought blogs, as well as Only Sky, which is where I'm writing currently. I wanted to write articles about Oscar Martinez and about other gay Latin characters. And in the trivia, it was mentioned that he is a secular humanist. And they had a link to the deleted scene, which is the same link that I put into my article. And you can see it. It's only like a minute long to watch from start to finish. It's a very minor scene. But I think that the importance of representation is something that is often overlooked. I know lots of people want really exceptional examples of representation where it is main characters who go on these multi-episode long story arcs for things where they talk about and unpack the impact that religion has had on their lives, as well as what it's taken for them to become secular humanists or atheists. I feel like secular humanist is a very specific term that we're only ever going to see very, very rarely. The only time in my entire life I've ever actually seen someone on TV say the term secular humanist and define themselves as a secular humanist is actually Oscar Martinez. And I think that is kind of remarkable for The Office. I didn't really think that they would ever talk about religion that in depth and talk about alternatives to religion like that. I think it's a real shame that more shows do not actually talk about religion and unpack it this way, even though there are a handful of very minor exceptions to this kind of rule. Both Blackish and The Middle, which were two popular sitcoms back when I was in high school and then a college student, actually had characters who went on these journeys over the course of an episode or two. In Blackish, the oldest child of the main family, I think her name is Zoe, she's the main character from Grownish. She talks about the fact that she's not sure if she's a believer. And there is an episode-long arc where they talk about the sort of impact that religion has had on Black families specifically. And they also talk about her journey. At the end of the episode, it is revealed that she is fine identifying as a believer, but it is a very fascinating episode. I believe that there are references, both intentional and otherwise, to A Raisin in the Sun, which is a play that actually features a Black character who talks about being irreligious and has questions about religion as well. And then in the other show that I talked about, The Middle, which is, I think, an ABC family sitcom that aired for, I want to say 7 or 8 seasons. I actually might be wrong. It might be a little bit longer than that. But in the final season, Axel, who curiously enough is also the oldest child in that family, has an episode, it's actually 2 episodes in that specific case, that revolve around Christmas. And he wakes up and he says that he doesn't want to go to church. His mother, who in real life is played by a famous Catholic woman, has a conversation with him, and she tries to get him to go to church, and he says that he doesn't want to. She says that she is like worried about what will happen to his soul if he doesn't go. And what ends up happening at the end of the 2 episodes is that he does go to church and he does continue to identify as a believer. I actually think that it's like really frustrating that this itself is a very common thing in these sorts of episodes. In lots of young sitcoms, they want to talk about religion and they want to show that there are characters who might identify as someone else or as something else. But at the end of the episode, they kind of try to bring that back. I think with ABC, it makes a little bit more sense just because of ABC's history. But with Blackish and with a couple of other shows, it's a little bit more surprising and disappointing. And there was someone in the comment section talking about Sheldon Cooper, which is another example of an atheist and a humanist in pop culture. I actually don't think over the course of Big Bang Theory that they ever really talk about him being an atheist all that much, although it is explicit. He does have conflicts with his mother, who's from Texas. But if you really want to see the story of that particular character, I recommend watching Young Sheldon. My partner is a very big fan of both Big Bang Theory and Young Sheldon. And there are multiple episodes in Young Sheldon where religion is a central focus and where young Sheldon Cooper's latent humanism, even though at that point he still identifies as a Christian. At least in most of those episodes, I think he still identifies as a Christian. He talks about this, and in several episodes, he also talks about Judaism, although I'm a little bit more worried about examples of that because he only talks about that because there's lots of famous people who are Jewish, and there's also lots of scientists who are Jewish. So that one's a little bit iffier. With representation, I think that part of the importance of representation is that you get to see yourself and you get to feel a little bit less alone. I think for a lot of people, representation might not be that big of a deal. For instance, if you've had characters who look like you and they talk like you and they think like you, I think that is a little bit easier to ignore representation for other people. I am a white Latin person, and there's lots of white atheists and there's lots of white humanists on TV. But when I think about Hispanic atheists and when I think about Hispanic humanists, it gets to be a little bit trickier. There's not that many characters on television who are Hispanic and atheists, or even who really get to have these sorts of conversations in the context of the setting that they exist in. One example that I brought that I was thinking of as I was preparing my comments for today was actually a little bit interesting because the character never talks about being a humanist, but it's a subtler sort of representation. I don't know if anyone here is a fan of urban fantasy, but I'm a really big urban fantasy fan. And The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, which was the sort of Riverdale Sabrina show that Netflix started producing a couple of years ago, and that ended, I want to say, in 2020 or 2021, has the main character, Sabrina Spellman, who is a witch, but it's very clear that she herself if you had to try and write down her religious views and her philosophical views, I think it'd be very easy to describe her as a humanist. I actually wrote a review for the first season of the show over on The Humanist several years ago. And I talked about the fact that Sabrina Spellman is definitely a humanist. She questions tradition and she talks about religious dogma, and she is very clearly opposed to orthodoxy and to traditions that don't make sense. She doesn't reject religion outright, but she does say that religion should make sense and that these beliefs should have some sort of basis in reality. She talks about the fact that if these beliefs hurt people and if it costs people freedom, that these beliefs shouldn't be practiced. The biggest example of this in season 1 is that I think episode 6 or 7 is their equivalent of Thanksgiving. For those of you who don't know, The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina is based on a comic book based on Sabrina the Teenage Witch, which takes place in a much darker and much grittier version of that sort of universe where witches are real and magic is real, but also they hide and they are like weary of Christians and being hunted down and persecuted. And while the comics and the show are pretty significantly different, the show takes that general idea that magic is real, that fantasy is real, that monsters exist, and puts them into a framework where they have to deal with persecution from Christians, and they also have to deal with unpacking the trauma of their own history. I actually think it's a very important show. I know it got lots of fame in atheist circles, at least in its initial season, for among other things, it has a statue of Baphomet. That I think a lot of us, especially if we're familiar with satanic imagery and the work of modern day Satanist organizations, have probably seen. The show itself is not always great, but I really like the way that it talks about these things. And I think that that sort of representation where I feel like a lot of young humanists, if they watch the show and if they think about their own possibly religious upbringing, they would see a lot of themselves in Sabrina Spellman. They would see a lot of her questions and a lot of her desire to make sense of the world and her desire to understand things. They would see that in themselves. And I think that this is especially true for those of us who were raised religious and eventually broke free from religious indoctrination. I know that when I watched the show, that was one of the big appeals to me. It was a little bit edgy and it was a little bit silly at times, but it was also filled with stuff that I think makes a lot of sense. If urban fantasy is your thing, I think that's a great example of urban fantasy representation, because in those sorts of shows, you're probably never going to see a character say, oh, God's not real or something like that, unless the whole point of the show is that the character is wrong, which is a problematic thing that I've seen in lots of Spanish language fantasy. And yeah, I've talked a lot about a lot of different types of representation, but I know that we're starting to get a little bit closer to the end. I just want to say that for me, representation comes in a lot of different forms. It doesn't always have to be a character explicitly saying that they're atheist, although I really appreciate it when they're that honest and when the show lets them say something like that. Representation can just be seeing yourself in a character. And for lots of secular humanists, for lots of atheists, that can be challenging. But I think that right now we probably live in the best time for representation. There was a slide that was shown earlier that showed just a bunch of different examples of representation, and it showed atheists and humanists in TV. And I really love that slide because I know that when I was younger, that slide would have been a lot smaller. When I first started my journey towards free thought and towards humanism, there were characters, let's see, Tony Stark wouldn't have been on that list. Kurt Hummel wouldn't have been on that list. I'm trying to look at some of the other ones. Oscar Martinez wouldn't have been on it. Temperance Brennan definitely wouldn't have been on it. And as we can see, there's lots of excellent examples of characters in pop culture that are explicitly atheists, agnostics, and humanists. And if we talk about what I talked about earlier, where how sometimes representation is not as blunt as a character saying that they are an atheist or a humanist, then we're going to see many more examples. Yeah.
I actually just rewatched 6 Feet Under. I don't know if you ever watched that show. It was an HBO show. It's about a family who owns a funeral home. But there's a lot, because they're constantly talking about death, right? or they have to accommodate for the religious needs of the various people who, you know, they're conducting services for, funerals for. There's a lot of discussion. And I mean, I don't know if, because the character that I'm thinking of specifically is Brenda Chenoweth. And if you've never seen the TV show 6 Feet Under, I think there's 5 seasons. It's one of the best shows ever on television. And it really is just this kind of, you know, dysfunctional family living, you know, and there's the death is constantly being discussed there, but it's discussed in ways that I feel like we don't really talk about very much because death makes us uncomfortable or whatever. And so Brenda Chenoweth is one of the characters. And I would say, and like her whole family, because I think both of her parents are like psychiatrists or something. So they're very like, you know, really smart, very wealthy. And so, you know, they have discussions about religion. And at one point, you know, one of the other characters decides that he wants to go sit at a Quaker church, right? And so they have a discussion like, this is not who you said you were. You didn't say you were going to be going to church anytime soon. So you get the vibe that even though she doesn't say it explicitly, I guess Brenda Chenoweth, I think would be an atheist for sure, and her whole family.
Yeah. That sounds.
And
really,
if you haven't seen it, you really should. Yeah.
I'm sure that there are other examples, especially of Hispanic characters, because I know that there are like Spanish language television shows that explicitly feature characters who are non-religious. I think The Good Bandits, the main character is not explicitly irreligious, although it definitely seems like he is at the beginning. It definitely seems like he's not a church-going man. The whole premise of the show is that a crime boss in, I think, Colombia. It's a show on Netflix. It is a Colombian show on Netflix, so I'm sure they want us to think that it's Colombia. A like crime boss has, I think it's a heart attack, and as he's being revived, he like has a vision from a guardian angel, and the guardian angel is like, hey man, if you don't get your shit together, it's gonna go real bad for you. And the whole show follows his journey, but there are other characters in the show who definitely seem to be non-religious. One of the main characters, unfortunately, she is an antagonist, although not all representation has to be like heroes. Villains can be representation too. She's like a lawyer lady, and she herself definitely seems irreligious. When they bring up the concept of church to her, she is like the amante. She's the lover of the man who is married. She like balks, and she has a very viscerally negative reaction. And I think that is more of Hispanic TV's view of what an atheist would say to church. But I actually really like it because it's a good show, and it's very funny to see the characters react to the man's like moral growth and all of that stuff.
There is a comment from Stephanie, who was one of our panelists earlier. She says, good call on 6 Feet Under. Brenda's awesome. The dad who dies in the show and shows as a go. Oh yeah, she's saying the other shows that he's been in before. She also says Bob's Burgers presents very agnostic beliefs. Yeah. And their views on LGBTQ plus are so incredibly progressive. Bob is bi, Jean is non-binary, and there are many secondary LGBTQ characters. I've watched that show a couple of times, but I've never like watched it.
It is exceptional. My partner is like, she's a non-theistic Quaker person, and Bob's Burgers is probably her favorite animated TV show. It is. I've seen all of it with her, and it is a very good show. Yeah.
She says, I have 4 Louise hats and her dress. Well, if there are no more questions, I don't see any more in the Q&A. We made it just under time. Thanks so much, Luciano, for joining us today. I really appreciate you taking the time to do that. Now your assignment is to go and watch 6 Feet Under, because it is the greatest show of all time, if you ask me. And thanks again.
Yeah, I had so much fun. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you. All right. Now we are about to wrap this up. I will not take up too much of your time. I just really want to say thank you to everybody for coming today. You know, we'll continue to so going forward with this year. Oh, I know one thing that I do want to show. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, unless you want to pull it up, the responses to the survey. I don't know if you have access to it, or do you want me to share, Lindsay?
Give me one sec, Karen, I'll find it.
Okay. So we put out a survey. We had 56 responses, asking you all what you would want us to focus on. A lot of the comments included it being very difficult to just choose one, because many of you, like me, feel that all of these are really important. But with regards to constitutional law, you can see the results here. The vast majority of the people who filled in this survey was, they weighed in and said that government funding of religious institutions was their number one issue. And then tax breaks and loopholes came in second. Let's see, and if we go down a little bit further, the green one is medical aid and death, dying and death. And so that was the number one choice for the majority of the people who answered this survey. And we can go down a little bit more to in the category of sound science. Number one here, almost equal split between bans on stem cell research, fetal donation related tissues, and vaccine exemptions, which of course the legislature this year preemptively decided that, you know, nobody can force anybody to get a vaccine, which nobody could really do that anyway, because most schools do allow for those exemptions, whether it's personal choice or religious exemptions, but now it can't even be listed as one of the recommended vaccines. Discrimination. Overwhelmingly, you all thought that state-sanctioned employment discrimination was your number one issue. And then coming in behind that is trans discrimination, which, you know, we're seeing more and more of that. And as somebody said earlier, this is a wedge issue that they seem to try to be kind of tearing people apart when, you know, they're doing other much more heinous things at the legislative level, if you ask me. And then overwhelmingly with education is school voucher programs. And I read something today about, you know, this game of chicken that Governor Ducey has been playing, promising that they will have a special session for to get rid of the AEL, the aggregate expenditure limit. But he's now reneging on that and saying that he, you know, unless there's even more voucher expansions, that he won't be doing that. So there's that. But we will continue to, you know, partner and work in coalitions to engage with folks at the legislature. Our members will continue to receive action alerts. We also will continue our support for school board members throughout the state. And we're asking everybody to let us know if there are any secular issues happening at your school board, your city council, your board of supervisors meetings, et cetera. You know, while the results of November's election were positive in many ways, and while we did manage to hold the line at the legislature, I'll be very interested to see what kind of behaviors happen at the legislature. And I predict that they're not going to be very different than they have been in the past several years. I believe that they will continue to drop bills that are, you know, discriminatory in nature, that are, you know, solving problems that don't exist. And it's my belief that they will likely then use it as an opportunity, you know, knowing that Governor Hobbs or Governor-elect Hobbs has veto power. I believe that they will use this as an opportunity to say, look, we tried to do our job and she just vetoed everything. So we're all going to stay tuned. We'll continue to do that coalition work. But if you enjoyed the programming today, please consider becoming a monthly donor to Secular AZ. If you're interested in volunteering, we're going to be tabling at various events this spring. And if you have a group, I've spoken before to say the North Scottsdale Democrats or some of the individual groups about the work that we do. Or if you want to hear about Diane's, you know, legal ventures and the things that she's working on, by all means, you could reach out and ask for Diane to speak to your group. She, if she's available, she's usually pretty willing to do that. But we're going to be at the Melrose Street Fair and some of the home tours and things like that. So if you have a group that you think might like to learn more about us, please reach out to info@secularaz.org. I really hope that everybody has a wonderful holiday season. And this is a fairly long webinar today, so Oh, somebody's asking for email, and I'm happy to share my email. I'll just put it on there for everybody. It's director@secularaz.org. So thank you all for joining us today. And I hope that you have a wonderful rest of your weekend and a wonderful rest of 2022. I guess I'll probably see you all in 2023.